I have views about Croke Park itself, and while you're the sheriff implementing the deal, I would say to you that not all services on the front line are as positive as you describe in terms of the change. And quite a significant number of services, particularly through health, are very badly affected, and it's been very badly managed. And I need to say this to you.
That absolutely, yeah.
And only yesterday we had a contribution from the Independent Centre of Living, and they were making the point that some of their critical staff are not protected by Croke Park, and they're being badly affected by it. I have a letter here which I was hoping to deal with in relation to the National Ambulance Service and to the to allow paramedics to transfer to another part of the country in an easy way, and it's almost impossible. This letter describes the difficulty of one such applicant, and again, there are issues that we are aware of as members that concern each and every one of us, and they concern me greatly. At the next meeting that we have, I intend to, as other members have done here today, take some time for myself and to ask you a number of questions. But I would say that the story presented to us here at times by accounting officers differs considerably from what we know or what you are saying. And that happened in relation to the HSE, to the Garda Commissioner. Education was another department where we asked, could the savings be achieved? Will they be achieved? And the answer was they didn't think so. So it does need to be squared, all of this. And I think that your appearance here before the committee is helpful in that regard. It gets the message out and it allows us a greater understanding of what you are doing. But verification on all fronts relative to this is just hugely important. 2.5 billion euro coming from your department to them. Is it open-ended? Is there a blank cheque here for Irish Water in terms of their setup? Because this is the way I see it. 11.25 billion euro worth of assets is transferring to Irish Water. Now, that 11.25 billion euro of assets, I don't know who did the due diligence on all of that. You say, I think you say, each local authority did it. What does that entail? Is it a building? Is it a pipe? Is it a pump? What is it? Who quantify that? So the taxpayer who funded this, because in the year 2007 to 2013, 2.9 billion euro was spent in some way on these assets. And 241 million was spent in relation to water services investment alone in 2013. So all of that there represents taxpayers' money, 11.25 billion. They bought these assets. Now, if I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong. That's the way I see it. Then there's a further 2.5 billion euro on top of that in relation to the funding from 2014, 15 and 16. So that's 13.75 billion euro of assets being transferred directly into a company. Now, as I understand it, and after that, that the corporate knowledge, which is worth something in commercial terms, is also being transferred into this company. So how much did you factor into for that built-up knowledge of all of this water system when you transfer the assets? Is that included in the 11.25 billion, or is that something that is just not quantified at present, or will it be quantified? Now, when you transfer all of that money, or all of those assets rather, into this company, for the pleasure of doing all of that on behalf of the taxpayer, you then charge the taxpayer for the water. Now, this is before we ever get to how they're going to fund the refurbishment or the renewal of all of the assets that they're getting. And from the last discussion that we had here in public accounts, I think it was yourself, Ms. Graham, that told us that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the taxpayer would also be expected to contribute something towards the, I think it was billions of euro that it's going to take to bring all of the assets, the water infrastructure, the pipes, the services and so on, up to scratch. The general complaint that I and others would receive is that taxpayers' money, totalling, 60 billion odd, went to the banks. They were bailed out with taxpayers' money. And when it comes to giving breathing space to some of the SMEs, no one seems to stand up for them.
Well,
and the other issue is in relation to the lending by banks to the SMEs. I receive complaints from all over the country regarding the attitude of banks towards the SME sector. And I know that you can point to performances within banks and statistics and all the rest of it, but there are business organisations that would question that and that would question how serious the banks are in relation to supporting the SME sector. And I think it's only right that I would say this to you and draw this to your attention, because it's rarely you would meet a business organisation that you wouldn't get a complaint about lending to the SME sector. And I think that it's an issue for the economy, for the Department of Finance, because it all affects the economy. We're trying to grow our economy based on the indigenous sector, 800,000 jobs, and so on, and sustain them. And there is that complaint out there. And the banks, as they get on their feet, are being less than sympathetic to the plight of those trying to restructure, and less than sympathetic to those that are trying to expand their businesses or indeed grow their business. That's my experience. The thought just crossed my mind, should actually have, I must recommend it to whoever might be chairing this committee in the next session, that both departments, public expenditure and reform and finance, should be brought in together to discuss maybe an overview of the Comptroller and Auditor General's report each year, so that we can get a handle on it. Because I don't accept that it should be the way it is, whereby you give over the money to public expenditure or to departments. And I won't say you're not concerned about it. I know that you have expressed concern about how it's spent. But from the taxpayer, and particularly businesses that are struggling, they would like to see greater accountability and a greater sense from each department that they clearly understand that these taxes that are collected diligently by revenue are perhaps not being spent with the same diligence and care that revenue applied to the collection of the taxes. And that's my view, having sat here for the last number of years, and my experience from being a member of the committee some years ago. And someone has to bridge that gap. And maybe on the publication of your report every year, Mr. McCarthy, there should be an effort made to have some sort of joint session with both departments to bridge the collection of the taxes, the spending of the taxes, and what's found in the Comptroller and Auditor General's account. Because while we deal with it here every year, it's never truly exposed or debated in Parliament, where it should be debated in a general sense, so that we really get a handle on transparency, accountability, and having the proper systems. It might have ensured, for example, that the appropriate reporting systems within the HSE, that one financial system, was in place a lot sooner. These are the issues that I think should concern us, because what gets counted gets done, and I don't think we're doing it to the greatest extent that is expected nowadays by the individuals that pay their taxes and watch how those taxes are being spent. There are procurement rules set down which are breached every day of the week with no apology to the government or anybody else that's trying to implement proper procurement across the government agencies and departments. And I would expect that those of you, all of you, that are at the coalface of the delivery of the services that you deliver and are required to deliver, that you would be making recommendations to the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, because the numbers of firms that we see in our work at PSE is very small, working for the different departments, and the cost is enormous. NAMA should be concerned about clearing their name and in all of what you did this morning, and whatever wrongdoing, if there was wrongdoing, should be uncovered and explained and identified. But when you have the Isle of Man, when you have the numbers of companies involved, when you have it explained the way it was explained this morning, the story just worsens. It just the plot thickens. And we haven't come to an end of it, quite frankly. And we only know that PIMCO disclosed to NAMA the 15 million. You have to ask how a firm that size cannot miss the 7 million. It's not answered. It can't be answered here. And I think that we do owe it to the political system and to the administration in terms of NAMA and others to get to the end of this. And for the MOU to appear and it having no official, if you like, backing from where it originated from, that's quite disturbing. And disturbing that the 55, it suggested that the 55 debtors, that it would be nil as far as they were concerned. Like, who did it benefit? What was this about? Where is the 7 million? Where is it going to go now? These are the questions that have to be answered. And in relation to our investigation, I know the CNAG will do his investigation into this, and it might shine more light on the processes and procedures within NAMA itself, to maybe benefit NAMA and benefit our understanding of what went on. But I do feel that it's an unfinished piece of work that can only be concluded by some agency straddling both jurisdictions to bring it to a head. And I'm not sure, I know that there's difficulty in terms of you appearing before the committee in Northern Ireland, or you said earlier on that you wouldn't. I think that with the PSNI involved, maybe they might expedite a thorough investigation that could thereafter, depending on their outcomes, be dealt with more appropriately at a committee so that the information can be put out there. And it is striking, Mr. Reid, by the way, that we get the release of these papers this morning, the letters that is, and the release of the MOU this morning. I think that alarm bells should have been ringing loud and clear a long time ago in relation to this, once you had sight of the letters and the correspondence. That's my view. The Carers Association and a parents group for children with disabilities have asked the committee to investigate what they believe is the insufficient funding, but also the poor management of existing resources for vital therapies and services for children with disabilities. And they point to the inconsistencies and discretionary budget allocations across the different HSE regions. So as a result of that, they suffer from a very poor consistency of the delivery of services. And in fact, in a border constituency such as Carlow Kilkenny, with its Laois border on the Carlow side of Great Cullen, there is often turf disputes over how services are delivered on one side and then how they're delivered on the Carlow side. And depending on where you live, and I think Deputy Fleming comes across this as well, and regardless of the efforts that are made through the HSE, the answer is always, you can get that service, yes, in the other administrative area, which might be in the Carlow side, but there will be a funding issue. In spite of the fact that the funding issue has already been addressed by virtue of the fact that the patient or client is receiving the services within the HSE area, but across the border. And these are issues that would appear to me to be easy to resolve, but for as long as I've been dealing with them, they are around. And I'm asking you, in the context of the letter that you received, would you kindly address that? The other fact that the group point to is the gaps in early assessment and the waiting times in excess of 1 year for vital services such as speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, physiotherapy and psychology, and that they're placing children with disabilities at risk of regression and denying them the chance to reach their full potential. So then the group go on to point to the figures that they recently obtained from the HSE of 1,940 children waiting in excess of 1 year for speech and language assessment. A further 2,983 who have already been assessed as requiring the service, and they're on the waiting list for at least a year without receiving the treatment. Then some 2,090 children are waiting at least 12 months for an OT service, which is essential to assist them in accomplishing everyday tasks, such as eating, dressing or writing. And 7,301 people, including children, are waiting for more than 1 year to receive physiotherapy. 11 local health areas remain within an early intervention team. So they're drawing attention to that first, and then they're asking the Public Accounts Committee to see if we can get from the HSE, in a clear, legible format, the total allocated budget in each of the areas of speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, physiotherapy and psychology, and a breakdown then by each of the 4 HSE areas for children with disabilities for each year from January 2011 up to now. And then in the same way to deal with the actual spend. So what was the budget, what was actually spent, and then a breakdown within the areas, which I think you should be able to achieve for us. In conclusion of the Public Accounts Committee for this term in the Dáil, to thank all those witnesses that appeared before us, to thank the Secretariat and the backup services that we have, to thank all of the members, both the ones presently serving on the committee and those that have been present or members of the committee during the course of the last 5 years. It certainly has been an experience and one where, like today, you often have to drag the facts and in this case the terrible abuse out from behind closed doors that are well guarded and place them before the public in the hope that the various departments that are responsible in this state take account of what is being done and take the appropriate action to ensure that the likes of what we've just heard, and indeed what we've heard in the last 5 years, does not happen again. I regrettably would say that we've come to terms of in terms of the Public Accounts Committee's work. When you hear the description, inquiry into accounts of a state body, it immediately rings alarm bells. In this particular case that we heard today, the bells rang true, and we saw where it's the often insiders that carry out the reports, and sometimes, in fact, a lot of the time, that is not satisfactory. To the whistleblowers that have come before us or that have contacted a committee, I want to put on record that I believe that they have been very brave individuals. We were cautioned a lot about receiving evidence from Sergeant Maurice McCabe, and look at the service that he did for the state. I think that the whistleblowers in this case are to be commended. Every effort should be made to protect the organisations that support the social workers and that ensure that the whistleblowers in turn are supported and protected. One other issue which has crossed our desk, often the last spin of the dice is when an agency of the state refers the issue in hand to the Gardaí, and then the investigation is pushed into a cul-de-sac and doesn't go any further. And I think that that's something that is perhaps done to buy time, perhaps done to create an escape for those that are involved, and it's something that the Minister for Justice and the Gardaí should talk about to determine if there is legislation required to deal with that type of, I suppose, instrument that would give people the out of jail card that they are looking for. In terms of legislation and the whistleblowers, to read the legislation, you can be sucked in by it, and I think that it's proven that it now needs to be strengthened, because more often than not, the whistleblower ends up as the person in the iron mask, silenced, in an office with no work, and we've had examples of this through different departments. And the culture, that failed culture, that allows all of this to happen, needs to be rooted out, because if it doesn't, this will just continue. And I've sat on the Public Accounts Committee previously. I've had the honour of chairing this committee for the last 5 years, and I would hope, as we face into an election, that those that are elected will have the bravery, the courage to take on the job that they've been given by the electorate, and to ensure that through legislation and their work on the committees in this House, that they bring justice to those that deserve it, and that they strike out to make a difference and bring about the reforms that are so necessary to make sure that this state functions better, and that the divide that's emerging between the state and its people is closed, and that we get better representation. But I think that this Public Accounts Committee and its members have done a fine job over the last 5 years, and I commend them for the work that they undertook when they were members. Thank you, and we'll now adjourn for someone else to take up the baton after the election.